Good morning, Daphne. It's nice to see you.
You
Good
too. Excited
morning.
for another day of the summit. Good morning, Jonathan. Morning, Amrit.
Good morning.
I love the energy this morning and I love the keynote. I was able to hear a bit of the end of it as I was logging in.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this presentation as well. It ties in nicely with the cause for the summit this year. So risk factors in family violence. Um, so I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. So let's start off with Michelle Mulchan. Michelle is the senior managing lawyer at Russell Alexander Collaborative Family Lawyers. She's been practicing family law for over 14 years, specializing in divorce, custody access, property division, child and spousal support, and family responsibility office enforcement matters. Her focus is on creating comprehensive, creative resolutions to family law matters, and Michelle excels at helping clients deal with complex financial issues that arise as a result of a separation. So welcome, Michelle. Great to see you again for day 2. And returning again, we have Jonathan. Good morning, Jonathan. Jonathan is a registered social worker, accredited family mediator, and psychotherapist who works in the family law system, completing parenting plan assessments, voice of the child reports, family mediation, and collaborative family law in private practice. He also provides psychotherapy such as cognitive behavioral therapy, family therapy, and couples counseling for children and adults. Jonathan is on the board of directors of the Ontario Association for Family Mediation, holding the executive position as treasurer of the board, and is on the board of Collaborative Practice Durham Region. We are also joined by Amrit. Good morning. Amrit Malhotra holds a Master of Social Work degree from the University of Toronto and practices as a registered social worker specializing in fertility and third-party reproduction, healthcare, trauma, grief, and loss. She's also an accredited family mediator with the Ontario Association for Family Mediation and is a collaborative practice family professional. Amrit is a board member with the collaborative practice Hamilton Halton. She's a co-chair of the Counseling Special Interest Group at the Canadian Fertility Andrology Society. And in addition, she provides individual and couple counseling in her private practice and is the president of Invicta Counseling. Wow. This really is the dream team. I'm so looking forward to your presentation. And without further ado, I will just pass the floor over to you to get started. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Daphne. This is great. I won't have to do any work with these two professionals here today. As you said, they really are the dream team. So why don't we start off with a poll, just so we can get to know our audience and maybe tailor a little bit of information. So our first poll is just tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you a family lawyer? Are you a lawyer practicing in another area of law? Are you a mental health professional? Are you a law clerk, a student? Or maybe you're actually going through this process yourself or have someone who is a loved one going through this process. So as we're just waiting for that poll to go up and go ahead and answer it while you have some time, why don't I just jump into the first topic, which is understanding the importance of risk factors in family law. And Jonathan, why don't I throw it over to you to start that with just a brief overview of domestic and family violence in Ontario.
Sure, yeah. So I think it's really important first to say that everybody should be donating to Denise House. I just sent in a donation, one for every day that I've been presenting at the summit. I did a donation for yesterday as well. So I would encourage all the audience members to donate as well and help that great cause. So it's really important as family law professionals, no matter what profession you're in, to know at least the basics about family violence, because it's something that will always come up in your work. It's really unavoidable, and a lot of family law cases have this as an element of them, and obviously most more difficult and more challenging cases definitely have family violence issues in them. So a few statistics. Family violence is very common, unfortunately, in Canada. In 2019, for example, about 22,300 kids were victims of family violence. And most of those victims were female, 60%, 40% were boys. Most were victimized by a parent, but other family members also contributed. People like siblings, step parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, that kind of thing. Most were parents, though. Family violence is much, much more common in rural areas than urban areas. It's actually almost double the rate. There are 652 cases per 100,000 in the country in rural areas and 325 per 100,000 in urban areas. So we see a big divide there. Now, keep in mind, most people live in cities, so it's still very, very common in cities. In 2019 as well, about 108,000 people who are adults experienced intimate partner violence. About 80% of them were women, and women were almost 4 times more likely to be victimized than men. And women were much, much more likely to experience severe violence, much more likely to be murdered or, assaulted to the point of bodily injuries than men were. Indigenous women were much more likely to be experiencing family violence compared to non-Indigenous women. The split there was about 61% of Indigenous women will experience it sometime in their life, whereas non-Indigenous, it's about 44%. So you can see that that's the difference. And LGBTQ2S+ families are much, much more likely to experience family violence. About 67% of women who are identify as LGBTQ experienced intimate partner violence compared to 44% of straight women. So we can see that unfortunately, family violence is still continuing. It's still a big issue in Canada. We are one of the safest countries in the world, but we still have this major problem that needs to be addressed on all levels. We need the government to deal with it. We need the frontline people like us to do it. We need, the public to work on it, and everybody kind of rowing in the same direction to try and prevent this from impacting the lives. And we know that it's very, very harmful for people to experience this. It causes a wide range of mental and physical health problems, and it's extremely damaging to children and can really negatively impact their long-term development. So unfortunately, these statistics are not very cheery, but it's important for family law professionals to know this information so that when you're walking into a case where this is an issue, you have the tools that you need to be able to manage that. And speaking of that, Michelle, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what you feel is the lawyer's role in knowing about and identifying and screening for family violence.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Yeah, it's incredibly sobering to think about it and to realize the privilege we have and the responsibility, right? It's like Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And that's what we're here to impart on everyone today. So just before we do that, why don't we see the results of our poll, just so we can moderate our conversation just a little bit. Excellent. So 68% of us are family lawyers. 21% of us are lawyers practicing in a different area of law. We've got 9% of law clerks, and we've got professionals in another field at 7%. And we have a couple mental health professionals. So welcome, everyone. Thanks so much. So I absolutely think that the lawyer's job is incredibly important. It's very sobering, but we see these cases every single day at our firm. There really isn't a day that goes by that we don't see these cases. And often we are the front line. We are the first person that person is going to get help and assistance. And so it's really important for us to have these resources and have them front and center. I'm a big advocate. I'm very technologically advanced, but I also like the old school ways. So I actually have binders on my desk still, and they're color coded. And I have some of these things printed and in front of me because, I don't know about you, Jonathan and Amrit, but I've had cases where in my very first consultation, I had a case where a woman was imprisoned in her house when she was able to do that call with me. So it wasn't one of those situations where I could say, hey, wait a second, give me 10 minutes so I can go find my data and my sheets and all of my resources. You have to have it at the ready. I had another one where it was, in this case, the husband who was being physically abused by the wife. And of course, the children were hearing the verbal abuse. And, you have to be able to get out of your gender roles, get out of your stereotypes, and really assist the client you have in front of you. I've unfortunately also had the client who is the aggressor as well, and giving them those resources is really important. So I think that, we need to screen, and we need to screen constantly. So that very first call, you should be screening. We should also be screening as you go. And there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, I don't know about you both, but when I first meet someone for the first time, I'm not exactly going to share with them my deepest, darkest fears and all of these horrible things that are going on with me. You need time to build that connection, to feel safe, to feel comfortable. They need to know that you are a safe resource, that you are non-judgmental. A lot of times you hear people say things like, well, why did you stay for so long if it was so bad? That's not helpful. That's judgmental, and that means that person doesn't feel safe to open up to you. You have to understand that these people are coming to you for help, and it's your responsibility to help them. So, we do the screening early, we do it often, and anytime we fear that there might be something going on, we try to have a very open and honest conversation with our clients to say, hey, this is, can you tell me a little bit about this? Have you ever experienced this? And sometimes people don't realize the impact of what their partner is doing to them is family violence, right? And sometimes it's your job to educate.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which is really scary. Go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I was just going to say, you're absolutely right that a lot of people who are experiencing this don't self-identify as victims of violence or abuse. And so when you're doing your screening, it's really important to ask about behaviors, like what have you seen, as opposed to saying, does your ex-partner or did your ex-partner abuse you? That's not the right question because they might not identify it as abuse, and B, abuse can mean a really wide range of behaviors, and we don't know specifically what that means. So I would ask more, and I'll talk a little bit more later on about some screening tools I use. But you ask more about the behaviors. Has your partner ever hit you or threatened you or held you in a room against your will, or those kinds of specific behaviors to get to the bottom of whether or not there is abuse and violence in the family or not.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Okay, so that actually leads us really nicely into our next topic, which is the definition and scope of domestic violence and family law. So the definition, so we're just going to talk about the Divorce Act because it's the kind of all-encompassing one, and it's really great and multifaceted. So for those of you who don't know, in 2021, the Divorce Act got a little bit of a facelift, and we got a lot of new terminology, a lot of updates to it. But one of the really important ones was this addition of family violence and the definition of family violence. So I'm not going to go through the whole definition. It'll be in the show notes at the end of the day. But very kind of high level, it means any conduct, whether or not it constitutes a criminal offense. That's really important, right? It does not need to be a criminal offense for it to be family violence by one family member against the other. So that's also important too, right? It doesn't need to be husband versus wife. It could be wife versus husband. There could be children involved as well. that constitutes a pattern of coercive or controlling behavior and causes the other family member to fear for their own safety or that of another person. And it could include things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, threats to kill or cause bodily harm, harassment, stalking, the failure to provide the necessaries of life, psychological abuse, financial abuse, even threats to harm or kill an animal or to damage property, or the act of harming or killing an animal. And the way that the Divorce Act is framed, it really defines family violence in the context of the best interest of the child. And this is really important because we have seen the impact on children when they grow up in a situation where there is family violence. And as I said before, you don't have to rise to the level of a criminal offense. So you don't need to meet that burden of, the proof beyond a reasonable doubt to be considered family violence. So for instance, I have a case right now where the husband there was a trial and unfortunately he was not convicted criminally, but that still doesn't mean that, that there wasn't family violence in that case. And that's really important to know. So Amrit, I think,
sometimes goes to the difference in the standards of evidence for criminal cases versus family cases, right? Where the standard of evidence for family law is much lower than criminal law.
Oh, absolutely. I've had a case where one party kept threatening to kill the puppy. And even though it didn't happen, that was the constant threat, the family dog, the dog that the children and the other parent loved desperately. That was the threat, that if you don't behave, one day that dog is not going to be here anymore. And even though it never happened, so it's not it didn't rise to the level of a criminal charge, it was considered in the family court, which was really important. So sorry, Amrit, would you like to talk a little bit about the forms of violence?
Sure. I mean, you've mentioned some of them with the forms of that could be physical or emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, or it could be in the form of litigation, where someone is repetitively brought to court on matters that are just going to create a lot of bills and a lot of hardship, and it can be really taxing on others. So this is hard work. I just want to say that even as the professionals in dealing with all of these things, it is really challenging, and it's important to consult if it's an area that you've never practiced in before and it's the first time that you're seeing it. It's always a good idea to consult with another professional who may have a little more experience in this so that we can best serve the clients. It can affect the whole family, and as a result, we have to ensure that the safety of the clients that we're working with and the children, that's super important. So yeah, I wanted to share that.
And just to add on to what you were saying, Amrit, there are different reasons why family violence happens in these cases, and kind of researchers have sort of come up with three broad categories of reasons why. One would be what's called coercive control, and that's where the violence is committed by mostly one person, and that person has a pattern of coercive control over the other person. So that might be threats and intimidations, it might be financial control, it might be limiting their access to family members, it might be abusing the family pet in front of them, it might be manipulating the children against them. So it's a broad pattern of abuse and control, and those are the most concerning cases. There's also something called situational violence, where let's say a couple go to a party and they have a few too many drinks and they come home and they get into a fight while intoxicated, and one person pushes the other person and they fall backwards and break the coffee table. But that's not a pattern of violence against one of the couple. It's sort of mutual violence that happens in very rare situations. And it's still very concerning. It can still be very dangerous and harmful for both the people involved in the violence and the children in the home, but it's not the same kind of pattern. It's not the same kind of severity. And so it has to be handled in a different way. And then another type of violence is violent resistance. Sometimes what you'll see is one of the people that's the quote unquote victim of the violence was actually the aggressor, and the real victim kind of fought back and defended themselves, and in the process might have maimed or injured the other person. So that those cases are usually in the more severe family violence cases where the victim of the course of control behavior is really fearful that they're about to die and or get really seriously injured, and so they act to defend themselves in a way that involves using violence. So those are sort of three broad ways of kind of categorizing some of the reasons behind the violence. And then, another thing to look at is what are the main risk factors for violence, and there are kind of broad categories of them. So individual factors, there might be relationship factors, there might be community and societal factors. So some of the individual factors might be if someone has a history of violence. So maybe they were violent in school and they got suspended for violent behavior towards their peers, or maybe they've had a violent incident at work, or they've been violent with other people at a bar, say. So there is a history of violence in different settings, and that really raises the risk that they're going to be violent at home as well. One of the biggest risk factors is substance use. So it doesn't really matter what substance they're using, any mood altering substance. So alcohol, cocaine, cannabis, heroin, speed, whatever drug of choice that they're using greatly increases the risk of violence. And one of the reasons for that is because our brain is very susceptible to these substances. And when we're using them, it actually turns off our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that is used to control the emotional part of our brain. And when we don't have that control, or when that control is lessened, the kind of inner tiger can come out, and you can really get into trouble with that. So you just don't have the ability to manage your mood and your emotions as well when you've been using substances. Mental health issues can be a factor as well. So personality disorders are a very, very significant risk factor. If someone has a personality disorder, they're much more likely to be a violent person towards their family. And sometimes other mental health conditions can contribute too, like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, those kinds of things. But keep in mind that just because someone has, depression or anxiety doesn't mean that they're violent. A lot of people are able to manage their symptoms, or maybe their symptoms for depression are withdrawing and not being angry and aggressive. So it's not enough just to have a person, a depression or anxiety to be violent, but it is one of the factors we look at. Demographics might.
Sorry, Jonathan, if I could
Yeah,
just jump
please,
in
Emma.
there for just a minute. Just from the perspective of mental health, I really like that you emphasize that it doesn't mean that just because someone is experiencing depression or anxiety that they're necessarily going to experience a violent episode or anything like that. But mental health does impact our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. And it does affect how we think and how we feel and how we act. And it also determines how we manage our stress and how we relate to others and make healthy choices. So it is an important part of the intake to get that information, to ensure that there are some supports in place to assist if there are mental health issues.
100%. And sometimes I think that's an excellent point, Amrit. And sometimes the mental health can be a symptom of other problems. So, for example, a lot of abusive, coercive control people use threats of suicide to get what they want out of their partner. And so is that a genuine mental health? Are they genuinely suicidal, or are they just using it as a tool to manipulate their partner? So yeah, I think that those are very good points, Amrit. Thanks for adding that. Other factors include demographics. So your age, younger people are more likely to be violent than older people. Gender. So if you are LGBTQ, you're more at risk. Than straight people, and women are we know are much more higher risk than men. Transgendered people are particularly at risk of violence, of being victims of violence. And socioeconomic status can influence risk factors as well. And the reason for that is because one of the overall risk factors for families is stress. And if you're living in poverty, you're going to be more stressed, and more stress can sometimes contribute to people being violent in their homes as well. And then there's relationship factors. So this is kind of unique to that couple. So you want to look at the power imbalances. How are decisions made? Who makes decisions? Who's kind of in control in the family? Those would be important things to look at. If there's a history of conflict in the family, that will be an important risk factor. If one or both of the parties are jealous and possessive of the other person, or have very strong views about gender roles. So if people who have very strict gender roles beliefs tend to be, on average, more violent than people who believe more in equality between men and women, for example. And actually, the presence of children can be an important risk factor, especially the more children there are, the greater the risk. And if there's stepchildren, that also increases the risk. And then generally, sort of more societal factors might be, the overall health of our society. So if we're going through, for example, a recession or a depression, and that's really going to increase the stress of families and increase the risk that there is violence. The sociocultural attitudes towards violence are also really important. Like if a group of people believe that it's a person's right to be violent with their family, then that will increase the risk that it will happen. And then there's also more cultural issues where people from Indigenous communities or Black communities are discriminated against, and maybe they don't have the same access to services, or maybe they're not being believed by their therapist or their police officers who are responding, or teachers or whatever. So those are all risk factors. And the last one I will say is accessibility to weapons. So we know that having easy access to either a knife or even worse, a gun can greatly increase the risk of really severe violence and even death and murder. So that's definitely one of the screening questions we always ask is, are there weapons in the home? Are they properly stored? This is exactly why we have our gun laws in Canada, where you have to store the gun locked and separate from the ammunition, because that prevents a lot of crimes of passion where someone grabs for a loaded gun during an argument and fires it off. So it's really, really important to make sure that you're asking about weapons in the home, especially in the areas that I work in, which are more rural. And it's much more common for people in my area to have guns than people in the city. Anything you want to add there, Amrit?
Yeah, no, I think it's excellent that you spoke about the accessibility. I think when you're working with newcomers or refugees that are coming, they may not have access to the funds or be aware of the resources that are available. So it is really important to note that the statistics are not higher in those communities necessarily for violence, but not having access to not having access to resources is really an important factor. There may be language barriers as well. So Yeah. And the stricter
that's a
changing
great
gender
point.
roles when they arrive in a new country, and maybe even the trauma that they come with because of their immigrant experience or their refugee experience. That's important as well. So having a trauma-informed approach when we're working with these clients may be very important.
Really important, and all the more reason to support places like Denise House because they do provide services in a lot of different languages, and are able to connect their clients with resources that are relevant to their cultural or language group. So please, everybody, make sure you support Denise House because it's a great cause, or a similar service in your region. What about you, Michelle? Anything that you want to add? Like what are the risk factors you see a lot in your practice?
Yeah, I think you guys have done such an amazing job covering them. I think what it's important to realize for family lawyers is to do that deep dive and understand the dynamics, the cultural, social backgrounds of your particular couple so that you can be ready. And, we're going to talk about safety planning coming up. Knowing these factors and these risk factors and knowing where your client may or may not be at a higher risk in some of these areas is important. So for instance, knowing if there are guns in the house will affect my safety planning to my clients and how I do that. So that's really great. Jonathan, I don't know if you could tell, but I was furiously typing as you were both chatting there, because it's great to have the refresher. And again, it's great to add, as I advocate to everyone, have that binder, have that resource, kind of have it in your own words too, right? It's one thing to have these show notes, they're wonderful, but having it in your own words and your own notes is really impactful, and you're more likely to remember them if you're making your own notes as this goes along. All right, why don't we go into our next poll? So whose responsibility do you guys think it is to screen for family violence? The lawyer, the family professional, the financial professional, other, so therapists, shelter workers, etc., or all of the above? Oh, and I see, Jonathan, thank you so much. You are putting in tons of links into the chat there. I really appreciate it.
I think Daphne will make sure that those are added to the show notes later, so that as I know a lot of the questions in our Q&A section are about getting resources from this presentation. So sounds like there's a real need out there for more information. So that's great.
Thanks so much. Yes, that's thank you so much. The chat, I see it's wonderful, and there's lots of questions. We have over 100 pages of resources, so don't you worry, you're going to get inundated with this stuff soon. Okay, so let's see
print them all out and color code them like Michelle does.
There you go.
Have them in a binder.
All right, so 9% think it's the lawyer's job, 1% think it's a family professional's job, 2% of you think it's the other or therapist's job, and 87% think it's all of the above. All right, Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think it's all of the above. Now, mental health professionals and family professionals do tend to have more specialized training in that kind of thing, or if you've done a course on family mediation or family arbitration, or parenting coordination, those courses always come with a heavy dose of family violence training as well. And actually, this is an interesting question, Michelle. How much do you learn about it in law school? Is it an optional course? Does everybody have to learn about it? What's the scenario there?
Well, I don't want to tell you my age, but I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I went to law school.
Well, you can't be as old as me, so.
I think we're probably the same age, Jonathan. I went to law school 15 years ago. So at that time,
we are not the same age.
Oh. You're so young at heart. I see you all the time. But 15 years ago, there wasn't this kind of this knowledge base and this movement to really incorporate domestic violence. Obviously, it was always a topic, and it was kind of the underlying of what we were taught in law school, but we never actually had any courses on it. I think it really wasn't until about maybe 7 years ago that it got a bit more mainstream. And now, especially with the changes to the Divorce Act that requires lawyers to think about these things, that we're getting all of these resources from the legal perspective. And I think it's really wonderful. I also think there's been more funding. I think that COVID had a big impact. So when you're talking about those, economic factors, I think that COVID really brought to light the prevalence of domestic violence. And there had to be some really interesting and unique ways that we safety planned with our clients. And I think it's great that we are seeing a lot more courses come out, and there's just a lot more in the media. I think that Kara's law came into effect not so long ago.
I was going to mention that. Yeah.
Yes. No, that's I'm not going to spoil it. It's so
No,
important
no.
that I met Jennifer.
No, it's good. It's yeah. So that's a law where judges now have to get training on family violence, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I'll let you, I won't spoil it because it is such a wonderful, I did an 1.5 hour course with Jennifer, and it was so impactful. There was not a dry eye in that course, let me tell you.
Yeah. It's a heavy topic. I think, and I'm sure both of you would agree with me that it's every professional's responsibility to screen for this. You can't get into family law without having to touch this at some point. It's impossible. So make sure you get the training if you haven't had it. If you haven't had the training and you're waiting to get it, then bring in another professional who can support you and give you advice. Or sometimes I'll do screenings for other professionals. For our family arbitrators, they're legally required to do a family violence screening. So sometimes they'll call me to ask me to do that screening for them, or someone like Amrit as well. But yeah, it's everybody's responsibility, and it's really important that we don't make assumptions about who's a victim of this. A lot of people assume it's exclusively for families who are in lower socioeconomic status, or certain cultural groups or certain language groups or whatever, but none of that's true. Family violence affects everybody, unfortunately. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic status you have. It doesn't matter what cultural group you're from or language group, whatever. So it's really, really important that every family that comes through your door, you're kind of screening them, because if you make assumptions about who is and who is not going to be a victim, then you might not be asking the right questions for your client. And let's keep in mind that working in these cases can be deadly. There are cases where partners have murdered each other, and so it's really, really important that we all work together to prevent those kinds of situations from happening. And that's why this kind of training is so important for all family professionals, all legal professionals, all financial professionals. It doesn't necessarily mean that, say you're doing a collaborative family case, it doesn't necessarily mean the lawyer is going to take the lead on managing the issues of family violence, but they're still asking the right questions, because they may be getting information from the client that other professionals aren't. And we all have to work towards, protecting those clients as a team. So I think, yeah, screening is important across the board.
Yeah, and communication is key, right? It's important if you're in a setting that everyone is aware of the violence, and so that we can make decisions in that realm and in that lens. Okay. Thanks so much for that, both of you. That was wonderful. Why don't we move on to the impact of domestic violence on children and the risk factors for exposure. So Jonathan and Amrit, you guys did a great job of kind of talking about some stats and some, the factors, but kind of focusing on children. Jonathan, you brought this up, but I want to highlight it, that research shows that people who engage in intimate partner violence are significantly more likely to abuse their children. And I think that is the importance of Kara's law. that we need to understand this. It doesn't mean everyone is going to. It's just something that we have to keep in the back of our mind when we're making these decisions, these really big decisions about who should be having decision making for the children. What should the parenting time look like? Should there be supervision? You know, is there a gradual increase in parenting time if there hasn't been some? Why children may be wary of going to one parent versus the other. All really important factors as lawyers that we need to understand. And oftentimes, intimate partner violence continues even after separation. So physical abuse, psychological abuse, stalking, harassment, all continues at a significant rate after separation and actually can be increased. So I always tell my clients that those first couple weeks after separation are the most crucial, because those are the weeks that things are statistically more likely to increase. And we want to make sure that if I'm the first point of contact, I understand that and I'm aware of that so that I can coach my clients, because they don't know this. This is my job. It's my job to educate them and to let them know. So
risk factors for kids is, I think, where you're heading in that.
Exactly. Yeah. Risk factors for kids during that.
Yeah. So it's going back to what you said earlier, where people that are abusive to their partners are much more likely to be abusive to their kids. That is true. But it's also true that it's just as harmful for a kid to witness abuse as it is to become a victim of abuse. And there's a lot of complex reasons for that. The main one is that kids, especially younger kids, are utterly dependent on their parents for survival. And in order to get through their childhood, they become very attuned to their parents' mood. If their parent is anxious, they're anxious. If their parent's upset, they're upset. If their parent's angry, they're angry. Because we know that emotions are infectious. And so if you have a child who's witnessing abuse of their parent, the person that is there to keep them alive, then they're going to feel very terrified, just as, and the impact is just as serious as if they were being abused themselves. And this comes, there's a huge and growing body of research called adverse childhood experiences, where we look at what is the impact of these experiences on children later in life. And what originally this study was started by doctors, because what they were noticing was that people were coming into their clinic with these medical concerns. They'd treat the medical concerns, but the medical concerns wouldn't go away. They'd stay around. It didn't matter what the clinic did to treat those medical problems. They use all the proper treatments for them, but they weren't recovering. And what they found was that there was a whole other layer of complexity to these clients, in that they had all been victims of violence as children. And this was negatively impacting their physical health later on in life. So we know now a lot more detail about how and why adverse childhood experiences negatively impacts children's development. And it all has to do with hormones. So there's certain hormones that children release when they're stressed that actually negatively impact their development. There's also something called epigenetics, where parents can pass down traits and tell their children's genes what to turn on and what genes to turn off. And so if a parent's experiencing abuse, they can pass things like anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions on to their children, just within 1 or 2 generations. There's also something called intergenerational trauma, where if your grandparent or great-grandparent experienced some kind of trauma in their life that negatively impacted them, it can actually cause you to experience a lot of mental health and physical health problems in your life, even if you've never had any traumatic experiences in your life. So we know, for example, that kids who have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences in their life are something like 3,000% more likely to attempt suicide as an adult. They're twice as likely to develop heart disease or strokes. They're twice as likely to develop diabetes. And they're much more likely to experience depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, all those very serious mental health conditions. And this effect lasts their whole life, and it actually impacts the length of their life, and they tend to live less years and with more health problems than people who didn't experience those traumatic events in their childhood. So we know it's really, really harmful for children, and it really negatively impacts their development. And for adults, it also contributes to all kinds of major problems. We know that stress is one of the worst things for our bodies. It's just as bad as smoking a couple of packs of cigarettes a day. And if you're living in an abusive relationship, you're feeling that stress every day, all night, and never goes away. And that can be really, really harmful on your body. There's this concept called allopathic load, which is kind of the amount of stress and harm that your body can absorb and your mind can absorb in a lifetime. And the more negative experiences you have, the lower your lifespan, because that allopathic load goes up, the more trauma you experience in your life. The bad news is that there's a lot of negative effects, but I do think it's also important to note that there are a lot of protective factors as well. There's this whole new body of research that I find fascinating called positive childhood experiences. And they're the opposite of negative or adverse childhood experiences. And they actually have a very protective role to play in children's lives. And they can not just undo the damage caused by trauma and abuse, but they can actually improve a child's life beyond that. So they have a very powerful role. So some of those protective factors might include things like having an adult that you really trust, like a coach or a sibling or an aunt or uncle, or someone who's, it might be someone involved in your church or a teacher, someone important in your life who has a positive relationship with you. That positive relationship can have a very, very protective effect on you. And so we know that there are ways of counteracting the negativity from abuse and family violence as well.
That's so
Amrit, did you
interesting.
have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think you just said it beautifully, Jonathan. It's so critical, like the childhood experiences, because it affects future life, and having those positive role models in your life can be really beneficial. And like even if the kids are engaged in sports and other things, like or having a teacher that's really involved, and even what happens post separation and the supports that are put in place can really be valuable for the children. Being resilient and being able to build on some of those strengths, I think, is super important.
Yeah, that was really
Yeah,
interesting. I hadn't heard about, I mean, obviously we all, conceptually understand that positive childhood experiences will positively affect children, but the data and the research behind it is so interesting. I may have to have you guys back just to talk about that one day. That could be a whole hour in and of itself, because the flip side to our job is also coaching our clients in how to create better situations for themselves and help their children and help their family, so that there isn't this intergenerational trauma, and that what's going on now isn't going to be impacting them for years and generations to come. So thank you both. Just before we move on to the next topic, I really quickly want to talk about the duty to report. So it is so important. Sorry, do either of you want to chat about this? No? Okay, sorry. I saw you both. You got so excited for it. I didn't want to take it away from you. But the duty to report. We as lawyers and lots of other professionals have a duty and a positive obligation to report if we think that there are situations that would be harmful to another party, to a child. And it could be your client who is facing it, or it could be your client who is the aggressor. And I unfortunately have had to do this. I've had to report once where it was my client who was the aggressor, and they made a comment, and I knew there were guns in the home. And I immediately went into safety planning, not for my client, but safety planning for the other party, right? And it's so important that you understand that you do have a positive obligation to report. You can't just sit back. You need to be active, and it's not just family lawyers. We all have this positive obligation. Teachers have it. I'm sure in both of your professions there is an obligation. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very important to know about the duty to report. In fact, with any client that I see, there is an agreement that we sign right from the beginning where they're told about the limits to confidentiality, and that if they tell me that there's a chance of harm to themselves or others, or there's a child that could be at risk, I need to report. I have to report. There's no choice. And even if a client is like super, super frightened about, well, what does this mean? I mean, now he or she is going to be more aggressive as a result of this. I mean, the children's aid societies are aware of how to approach these matters, and they deal with it in a delicate fashion, but we absolutely have to report when there's any domestic violence, because the children are witnessing, whether they were impacted physically or not, they're witnessing it, and it's impacting them based on what Jonathan has shared. These are adverse childhood experiences. So.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Okay, why don't we go into our next poll now? So, what are signs you can look for to determine if there is domestic violence taking place? So, A, partners talking for them. B, if they have a difficult time making decisions without their partner. C, physical signs. D, financial issues. And E, all of the above. All right, so just while we're talking about that, why don't we start in a little bit with behavioral and physical signs to look for in clients? And I think, Jonathan, you were going to start talking about that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly about screening in general. So when we screen, we want to it's really hard to say if you see this, it means that, because it could mean one thing, it could mean another. People are very complex. We engage in very complex behaviors. And so you might see the same behavior for different reasons. So I'll give you an example. Someone might be cagey and not make eye contact and be fidgeting when you're asking questions about this. What does that mean? Well, it could mean that they're just anxious. Maybe they're intimidated by lawyers or social workers or whatever. It could mean that they're hiding something, that maybe they're the abuser and they're feeling anxious about asking these questions. It could be they're a victim and they don't feel like they can confide in you. So it's important to note that not one sign means exactly this. It's a constellation. You're looking at a pattern, and you're looking at both, physical, behavioral, but most importantly, you're going to ask the right questions. And do the right kind of screening. And there's two broad types of tools that are used to do screening. One are called guided questionnaires, and those would be things like the MASIC, the DOVE, or the RIA, which is a homegrown one provided by the Barbara Schleifer Clinic. And then there's others called actuarial assessments. And anybody who's a numbers person will know what that means. And actuarial means you're looking at statistics. What's the statistical likelihood of a behavior or any kind of thing happening again? So insurance people love actuarial assessments because it tells you what kind of interest rate or what kind of insurance rate you're charging your clients. But it's also used a lot in policing and corrections and risk assessment. So there is a homegrown risk assessment tool that's used by police and shelter workers, hospitals, that kind of thing. It's called the ODERA, the Ontario Domestic Assault Risk Assessment. And when you do that assessment on a client, you actually get a percentage chance that this is going to happen again. So you're looking at the percentage risk of the person being a victim of violence again. And so they look at statistical factors. And there's two types of statistical factors. There's dynamic. Those are ones that change over time, like whether a person's been drinking that day or not is something that might change day to day. And then there's static factors. And those are usually things that have happened in the past that aren't going to change. So, for example, if someone is convicted of assaulting someone, that conviction is a static factor, that they're not going to make that conviction go away. Even with a pardon, that conviction still happened. ODERA looks at a mix of those factors, and will give you a statistical likelihood. This is 24% likely to happen again, or 67%, or 80%. It's never going to be 100% because people are complex beings and they're never 100% predictable, and it won't tell you when this is going to happen. It's just saying this is very likely to happen again. And that's the ODERA is a great tool because it takes very little training to learn. I have done the training and I'm a certified ODERA user. The training, I think took a day, maybe 4 or 5 hours. But the intention is that it's an easy to use tool that you can use very quickly with your client. So, for example, if you've already done like a full intake and screening, and your client calls you up and say, "Hey, something really bad happened this weekend at the house between me and my ex. A, B, and C happened, and I'm really worried it's going to happen again." You use the ODERA questionnaire, and you're going to be able to tell the client, "Yeah, this is likely to happen again," or let's do some safety planning. I don't think it's going to happen again, but we want to be cautious just in case. There's all kinds of other actuarial assessments that will give you a percentage likelihood. There's the SORAG, which is similar to the ODERA, but it's a bit of a longer questionnaire. I can't remember what it stands for. Something about the risk assessment guide, but I can't remember what the SO stands for. There's the VRAG, which looks at the VRAG looks at violence, and the SORAG looks at sexual violence. So there's different questionnaires that can get at different specific topics that you want to screen for. For me, I like the MASIC and the DOVE and the RIA, which there'll be links for all those screening tools in the show notes. They're all free. You can download them. You can just Google them. Just Google MASIC, MASIC, or DOVE. I think it stands for domestic something violence something. Yeah, I can't remember. Anyways, I always use one of the guided questionnaires like a MASIC and DOVE during my screenings with all clients who are related to family law. And I won't necessarily have the form printed out and fill it out, but I'll be asking the questions on the form in a more kind of conversational way and recording my answers in my case notes. And that will help highlight if there are any major issues. And so, for example, the MASIC asks about how decisions are made in the family, how money is dealt with. Are there any weapons in the home? Does your ex-partner ever use violence? Have they ever hit you or kicked you or punched you, or all those kinds of things? So it can help guide your intake screening to make sure you're covering all the important bases. Mental health is another one they ask about, which is really important as well. The RIA provided by the Barbara Schleifer Clinic is also good because it looks at cultural factors as well. Amrit, what do you use any screening tools? What are your favorites?
Not the MASIC. I think the MASIC is really comprehensive, very useful tool. So, but I'm interested to look at some of the other ones you've mentioned as well, Jonathan. It's great.
Yeah.
I also
What
use
about you,
MASIC.
Michelle? Do you use the screening tool?
Yeah, I use the MASIC as well. That's the one that I just find it complements so well with our intake process anyway. And I am like you, I'm not going through the questions saying, in this particular order, but I'm aware of the questions. I'm kind of going through them and marking down if I'm worried, and if if there's enough kind of points there that I'm really worried about. That's when we start really looking at the MASIC and saying, okay, maybe I do need to sit down and ask these questions, and maybe we need to have some deeper dives, and maybe we also need some time so that the client can get comfortable with me so that they can answer this, because what they answer on their first meeting or second meeting with you might be very different when you've known them for 5 or 6 months, when they're more comfortable and open with you. So thank you.
Really good point, Michelle, that you just made there. And I want to emphasize it. screening doesn't just happen in your intake session. Screening should happen throughout the process, right until the point where they're inking the separation agreement, because things can change, dynamics are complex, and it's, I think what you said there about clients maybe not contributing as much information in the first session that you have with them, and maybe this information comes out slowly over time as they build trust with you, or maybe as things at home get worse and worse, they, at some point they feel compelled to share with you what's going on. So screening doesn't just happen at the beginning, it happens throughout. And another important piece there that you said is that trust is so important to build with your clients. So when they come into your office, the first question you're asking is not, "Hey, did he ever abuse you?" It's you want to build up to that and ask more benign questions at first, and kind of build that trust over time, and develop the person's comfort with having a more and more stressful conversation with you and talking about bigger issues. So yeah, trust with your clients is really key in this scenario. And I think Amrit said earlier, which I think is really important to repeat, a trauma-informed approach is really important too.
Absolutely. All right. Sorry, I know we didn't do our poll results, so let's get them up. Yeah, I think 86% of us, all of the above. Those are all important signs that we should be looking for. And the MASIC, the DOVE, the RIA, all of those kind of incorporate that in different ways. All right, so let's move on to our next one, because this is the one that I think we get the most questions about, which is strategies for effective client communication and safety planning. We've been using this word safety planning, all throughout. What does it actually mean? Amrit, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, when I'm putting together a safety plan with the client, first of all, there's the reporting to Children's Aid. There's some discussion around whether a restraining order is needed, to ensure that their legal counsel is aware of what's going on so that they can get some direction, that they're connected with supports, whether it be a therapist, an individual therapist, just to help guide them through the process. It may be information about shelters that are available for that safe place, because they may not be able to go to a family member's home for risk of harm that could come to the family members that may be housing or sheltering them, and further harassment. So it is really important to provide those resources. Assaulted Women's Helpline, and I think there are a few others that are going to be provided with the notes that are going to be sent out to everyone, ensuring that they have their important certificates, like documents, passport, marriage certificate, birth certificates for the children themselves, like tax returns, like all kinds of different things, so that they have everything that they require. Maybe even just one set of clothing kind of in a takeaway bag so that they have it, but knowing that also that they can always return back to their home, escorted with the police to collect any items, that they don't need to take all of those things. The safety is of utmost importance. We want to keep them safe during that time. Is there anything I've missed, Jonathan? Anything else that you would suggest as far as a safety plan?
Yeah, I think that one of the important things to keep in mind is that if you need to safety plan, like if you are a parent who's dealing with family violence, I would really recommend you connect with a professional to do your safety plan, because they may be thinking about things that you might not have considered. Like, you gave a list there of some of the things, Amrit, that are important, but there might be other things that that you as a person may not think about. But generally, what I recommend is if people are living in a dangerous situation, first of all, we want to make sure they're aware of how much danger they are in, and that we don't want to sugarcoat it. People who are going through separation are much more at risk of being a victim of violence than people who aren't going through a separation. And I recommend people have what I call a grab and go bag. So that might include spare medication if you're on any medication, any personal items that you need, deodorant, tampons, change of underwear, a couple of extra shirts, and then making sure that that is somewhere safe. So it could be at a neighbor's, it could be at your parents' house, it could be, stored in the shed in a location that your partner doesn't know about. And that is, a bag that you can grab and live off for a couple of days. So there probably should be some cash in there as well, or a bank card or credit card or something like that. And I always tell clients, take it seriously, even if you don't think it's serious, because the people who ignore threats of violence are often the ones who end up, getting severely harmed or murdered by their partners. So take it seriously. If you grab your bag and you go to your parents' house overnight and nothing happens, no one's harmed by that. But if you've just protected yourself and your kids from a violent attack, then you've escaped a really potentially harmful experience. So take it seriously. Be prepared to go somewhere and have a plan. The other thing that's important to think about having a plan is that when we're really stressed, we don't think very well. Our emotional brain gets really, really stimulated, and it actually turns off our thinking brain. So in the moment, when you're trying to escape a very dangerous situation, then you want to have the plan there to go so that you don't have to think about it in the moment when everything's stressed. But sorry, I think I went on a little bit long there. I think we're over time. So I'll pass it back to Michelle and Daphne now. My
Thanks.
apologies.
Just before Daphne comes on, and I'm sorry, this always happens. We have so much, and we could do this for 3 hours. But one of the big pieces of information you're going to get is called the HELP Toolkit, HELP. It's from the Department of Justice. They actually have a free course, which is, I think, 75 minutes. So it's very takeable. It's very doable. And the resources are phenomenal. It's over 100 pages of resources. It has links. It has ways to speak to your clients. It has what to do. It has community resources. There's just so much. You're going to get a ton of information from us. So please do look at it. I think the most important thing I could tell any new family lawyer or any family lawyer who's interested in this is take the training. Because the trainings that I have done are 2 or 3 days at a time, and the refresher courses are 2 days. So, this is really hard to pack all of this into one day. And I hope we just gave you the flavor of all of the things that you need to think about so that you realize how important this is, and that the detailed training is key. It's so imperative that you have it done. And we'll be giving you tons of links. You're going to get so many resources. You're going to be overwhelmed with them. And I'm glad. I would rather overgive you resources, and you can choose the ones you want to use. All right, Daphne, I see you're here to kick us off.
I am, but what an amazing presentation. I'm so happy to let you guys take as much time as you need. Such an important discussion, especially in family law. So thank you so much, Amrit, Jonathan, and Michelle, for sharing your time, and Jonathan for making donations to the Denise House over both days. We really appreciate it. And just a note to all the lawyers in the audience as well, this presentation was accredited for 1 hour of professionalism content by the LSO. So make sure to document that. And yeah, I think Jonathan has answered questions, and there's lots of resources. So thank you so much. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. But otherwise, we're going to take just a short break.